Surfers Paradise, Queensland, October 1986. A reunion of Allied prisoners of war is also the start of an exciting search for a lost chapter in Australia's war history. It's a hunt for a story vastly different from any other involving prisoners of war. It raises the deepest questions of personal honour, of loyalty to one's country, of moral choice.
Ladies and gentlemen, Film Australia is making a one-hour television documentary. We are hoping that someone will be able to tell us how Calling Australia was made.
Through the medium of this film, which is a valuable means of giving information on latest events of our daily camp life, we are brought closer to home and our dearest ones, thanks to the full cooperation given us by the Nippon authorities. We hope that you will recognize the face of someone with whom you are familiar. You are not looking at a bungalow in Rose Bay, though very much like it, but a real home for officers. This privilege, as stated in international law, is given only to officers who have pledged their word of honor. Necessary commodities are supplied to us. Not plentiful, but rationed enough to keep everybody going on a normal scale. So here you see them, as they naturally are after payday. The canteen being the most popular spot.
We know that this film wasn't true to the lives of most Australian prisoners under the Japanese in World War II. But how did Calling Australia come to be made? And who appeared in it? Were these men cooperating fully with the Japanese in making this film? Did they live like this for their entire captivity? Why, for the last 40 years, has the full story behind Calling Australia been shrouded in mystery?
Bailey, perfect. How do you do it?
Constant practice, your case is good, sir.
Our first tantalizing clues emerge here at the National Film and Sound Archive in Canberra. Constantly adding to its collection, the archive is the only national body whose main purpose is to preserve Australia's moving image and sound recordings. In 1969, Ray Edmondson, now Deputy Director of the archive, was the first person to see Calling Australia in a quarter of a century.
I came across these 3 cans, 35mm cans. They would have been fairly rusty, with the label Calling Australia on it. And so I put these on the moviola, ran them through, and I was just quite intrigued and puzzled by it because I was fairly new to this sort of game at the time. And here was this odd film featuring obviously Australian soldiers in a camp setting, and it was very positively angled towards the Japanese.
Full attention is paid to the regular partaking of standard physical exercise. Here the men are being led by a Nippon officer through a routine of calisthenics as carried out daily in Nippon homes.
And it finished up with this amateur concert party, and I was sort of wondering why was a cameraman filming this amateur concert party? So I just was puzzled by it, a bit nonplussed, and I asked a number of people to look at it as opportunity arose.
I'll do with you later.
It took a long time for any kind of reaction to come forward about it. The earliest one that I remember with any clarity was Peter Luck, when he was researching his series, This Fabulous Century.
all we knew was that there was something uncanny about this film, something mysterious, something unnerving, something wrong, and something that dawned on you as you watched it, that it's a most peculiar, bizarre experience watching this film. We've always had this whole set of images about what Japanese prisoner of war camps were like, and here we are suddenly being presented with one that was presumably like a luxury hotel. And all the men in the film seemingly fit, although so strangely like zombies, heads shaved, going through an almost ritualistic performance.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, gentlemen. How's everything? No, thank you. I'm running back this morning and I'll go get away.
Why are they doing this? What's made them do this? That was the biggest question. Then become more sinister connotations. There's some crime being committed here. It's truth being totally perverted. Then sympathy comes to you. Obviously, these men are under great duress. What's happening to them off screen?
Introducing to you Captain H.L. Fraser, born in Adelaide, was previously a barrister by profession. Still interested in journalism is Flight Lieutenant S.F. Downer from Adelaide.
Well, first of all, it seemed a relatively easy matter to find someone, at least, because there are, in fact, people named in the film, and I, for one, assumed they were genuine names. And I think we went the traditional route for nearly 6 months, following Army Records, RSL, then to business phone box, the Grapevine even. And eventually, I drew blanks everywhere. I found, I think, some of the people had died, some had passed on to God knows where.
Clearly, if the mystery of Calling Australia was ever to be solved, these men had to be found. Our own hunt took us to the National Library of Australia. Since the 1960s, one of its biggest collections of personal papers has been here in the manuscript division. They are the papers of Frederick Daniel, an Australian film and radio pioneer. During the war, he was officer in charge of the Netherlands Indies Film Unit in Melbourne. Until recently, we had no idea that the Daniel papers held information vital to the story behind Calling Australia. But we did know of a 1982 statement by this man, the late Harley Davidson. A filmmaker from Germany, he came to Australia on the prison ship Dunera and was interned. It was through Fred Daniel that he came to work for the Netherlands Indies Film Unit. The Harley Davidson document mentioned a Sergeant Arthur Ebling, who appeared to know some of the story behind Calling Australia. Arthur Ebling had been a member of the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion when caught by the Dutch surrender in Java. We found Arthur Ebling.
To see this now. The copy that you're looking at was taken off the nitrate original back in 1970 when it was in quite good shape. The original is now largely decomposed.
Arthur was a prisoner of war for more than a year in the bicycle camp Java. To the best of his recollection, Australians who appeared in the film were fellow inmates at the camp.
Introducing to you Captain H.L. Fraser, born in Adelaide, was previously a barrister.
H.L. Fraser, he was officer with the 2nd 3rd Machine Gunners. He worked for the one of the insurance companies, MLC, I think it was. He's now dead.
By the time we get back, I wonder what will it become of our home. I'd sure like to get back home. Find my luck at Flemington again.
That's Bill Hammond, the adjutant of Black Force. He finished up in Formosa. Now, he's still alive, living in Sydney. And he's playing, well, he'll be able to tell you lots about it now.
At last, we had a positive lead. Although Bill Hammond didn't recall much about the film himself, he was able to lead in turn to another man, who, if we're to believe this scene, had actually directed Calling Australia. This man was Jack Ifold. But had he really directed the film?
I wouldn't have director of any film that I know of.
And Jack Ifield could remember little else about the film.
Well, I don't remember a great lot. I wasn't particularly interested in it.
Another man we found from Calling Australia was John Goodrick. In addition to telling us much about the film, he was able to relate how the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion had ended up in prison camp in Java. In the background were heroic campaigns in both Java and the Middle East.
Of the Java campaign, I recall that it was rather confused in many respects. We were not a complete unit because most of our equipment had been left in the Middle East.
June 1941. Many months before the fall of Java, the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion had helped to score a notable Allied victory against the pro-German Vichy French army in Syria. Britain had committed Australians to the campaign without consulting the Australian government. After the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Australia's Prime Minister Curtin ordered his 6th and 7th Divisions back to defend Australia. In early February 1942, part of the convoy moving across the Indian Ocean was the liner Orchides. It carried 3,400 veterans of the Syrian campaign. They had been directed to the Dutch island of Java. On the 16th of February, the Orchides reached Java. 4 days later, the British Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Dutch East Indies rejected a plea by Australian Prime Minister Curtin to withdraw the Orchides troops from the island. Britain was anxious to have these men defend its Dutch colonial ally to the last.
There seemed to be some indecision as to whether we really should have been there or not, but basically we were reorganised by Brigadier Blackburn into an effective force and used whatever equipment was available.
The 1st of March 1942. 2 weeks after the Orchides troops arrived, 40,000 Japanese landed on Java, pushing 25,000 Dutch into rapid withdrawal. Over a 1-week period, Australia's land and air forces performed the only true defense of Java. The 2nd, 3rd machine gunners held a vital bridgehead for 2 days. But on the 5th of March, the Japanese occupied Batavia, Java's capital city. An eyewitness recalls the Japanese arrival in Batavia.
I saw people running from there towards in the direction of me, yeah? And shouting, "The Japanese has landed. The Japanese have landed, and they are looting the city." And I was scared. I made a U-turn and back to my house, some kilometers away from there. And when I arrived there, I found an Indonesian young man riding on with a loudspeaker shouting, "Don't make trouble in the street, otherwise the Japanese will punish us and destroy the whole neighborhood." So I was scared, of course.
But the Japanese had long prepared for this event through their propaganda.
Through Radio Tokyo, we heard every day almost the propaganda by the Japanese and stressing on the slogan, "Sama Warna, Sama Bangsa," which means the same color, the same race.
The 7th of March, 1942, the Dutch Indies Governor-General and the Allied Forces Chief met with General Hitoshi Imamura, commander of the Japanese invasion force, to discuss the end of hostilities. At the end of a 2-hour conference, the Dutch were pushed into unconditional surrender.
We didn't accept the Dutch capitulation as applying to us, and it was probably a further 24 hours before word came through that our command had issued the orders that we were to capitulate.
The capitulation affected 2,700 Australians. The Japanese were astonished to find that the Australians had been fighting not independently, but under British command.
I don't believe that Australian troops were unnecessarily wasted. I believe they were wasted. But it may have been necessary in the broader plan of things to have a delaying action such as the one we had on Java.
Japan had conquered the Indies in 22 days. For Indonesians, the invasion brought to life the 12th century prophecy that Java would be dominated by Europeans who would then be expelled by a yellow race. This yellow race would rule for the lifespan of a maize plant, after which Java would again be free. For the Japanese, who had expected strong resistance from the Dutch in Java, the crown jewel of Holland's colonial empire, the rapid surrender was a victory against an unworthy foe.
They were also surprised to find the extent to which the Indonesians cooperated. This is not something they'd really been prepared for, but they found as soon as they landed that Indonesians came out to greet them and waved flags and congratulated them, hoping, of course, for release from colonialism. And this certainly assisted them. It certainly frightened the Dutch. The Dutch found in the last weeks of their regime that Indonesians were turning against them everywhere. These people who they had thought to be the most mild and docile colonized people on earth suddenly looked at them with hatred in their eyes, and the Dutch found that profoundly disturbing, and it certainly contributed to the very rapid surrender.
Bicycle Camp, Java, 1942. For the young Australian servicemen, the prison gates slammed on a country they knew too little about. Of the Japanese, they had only the haziest notion. Back home in Australia, news of prisoners under Nippon was frustratingly scant. Letters from camps were infrequent, and when they did arrive, they were cryptically brief. Another way for prisoners to get a message home was to broadcast it through the Japanese. Australian authorities viewed these broadcasts as bait for Japanese propaganda, but from early in the war, a number of prisoners in Java, Malaya, and elsewhere took advantage of the service. The main attraction? To tell their relatives they were at least alive. In appealing to Australia, Japan used tactics similar to those which had gained them support in Indonesia. By reading Australian newspapers and listening to ABC radio, Japanese propagandists made a close study of Australia. For one of the major themes of Japan's radio war was to invite Australia to throw off the British yoke and join Japan's co-prosperity sphere.
皆さんの学校新聞の時間でございます。国民学校の皆様、お元気でいらっしゃいますか?
To attract Australia to Japanese rule, this scene from Calling Australia showed the apparent harmony of Indonesian life under the Japanese.
Well, I hope things are as peaceful as this.
Yes. Our sincere hope is to maintain the freedom, independence, and prosperity of Australia.
It was back to Arthur Ebling to find another man with extensive knowledge of how Calling Australia was made. Arthur remembered that a Navy man called McNab was involved in the film. Don McNab had survived the sinking of HMAS Perth during the invasion of Java.
I'm the young serviceman that sits at the table on the golf links at Garut, writing a letter to my presumed wife or girlfriend, and I did take part in the swimming. The first thing I knew of it was we were lined up opposite the Japanese camp office. I think there were 74 of us involved, and we were entrained to through Bandung to Chimay and put into a Dutch camp. Even at this stage, we didn't quite realise what was happening, but suddenly we saw cameras and we realised it was something to do with filming. The guards didn't seem to worry too much about us. I was given a couple of cigarettes, I think, but at that time I'd only just started smoking them. we were told nothing. And then, oh, this is very difficult, but then I think somebody said, would you like to play billiards? Yeah, the little Japanese interpreter fellow said, would you like to play, can you play billiards? Would you like to play billiards? And I think we all said yes. I do recall being told to go out onto the green, and when I got outside, they had Dutch men and women walking arm in arm and little kiddies around. I was given a typewritten sheet with, I couldn't read it exactly at the time, but it was the letter I was to write to my girlfriend or wife in Australia, and I was under the impression that I would just have to sit there and make motions, but they did make me write the letter.
We had together. My thoughts are of home, to the chubby koala bears, kangaroos, its lovely beaches and beautiful cities. And yet, amidst all that abundant beauty, I wonder what you are doing now.
Some of the wording in it was so ridiculous that I was inside myself quite happy, thinking, well, if, you know, my parents ever see this, they'll laugh their heads off. I apparently wasn't acting quite well enough, and I heard one little Japanese say, cry. And I think something to the effect about, I can't cry. And I don't know what he said, but next thing they put drops in held my head back and put drops in my eyes, and I cried then, all right, quite well.
Unknown to the prisoners, the film was exceptionally convincing, well made, and showing an awareness of Hollywood's capacity to wring out the tears. The film was, in fact, made by Beppan, a secret service and propaganda wing of the Japanese army. The director was a Korean, Aitaru Hinatsu. The writer, Shigetoshi Mizuta, had been assigned by Beppan to study Australian life and customs in early 1943.
Oh, I had a ball, yes. I ate well, and I think I slept well. There didn't seem to be that fear of a belting. Everybody seemed to be smiling. I think they knew what they wanted from us, and in a sense we were cooperating. What else could one do? We didn't know what the result would be if we didn't cooperate.
One morning I was asked, or told rather, by the Japanese that they needed me and another chap to go up and walk along the streets outside the shops in Bandung. And they said, this is where you'll walk. But they said the footpath's pretty dirty, so you've got to clean that up first. So they gave us a bucket and water and a broom. And then they said, now you'll go inside and we'll photograph you as you come in the shop, and we want you to handle some of these women's garments. Something I had never done before. Anyhow, we did this, and that was the morning. Dick Hamilton and I. I was worried. In fact, I spoke to our camp commandant, and he said, well, you know, do it. We're doing it under duress. Lots had been done earlier, and this was only one small segment of the film. Whether they were ever going to use it or not, I had no idea, but we did it because, well, for peace sake.
Presenting The Bright Abandon, a musical comedy in 3 scenes, and possibly the biggest and brightest show in captivity.
The narrator of Calling Australia was Lyndon Hanson, an Australian civilian internee. After the war, he told an inquiry he recorded the commentary under threat to his wife and child. The Japanese, however, rewarded Hanson with a house in Batavia. He became the star of an anti-British feature film and was a familiar voice in propaganda broadcasts.
However, such characters quite possibly refer.
He was last heard of in Java in 1947.
In which case, intending litigators are warned that it is not of the slightest use to kick up a stink, as we just don't care.
Pretty tough on us when we hear that the American propaganda broadcasts say that we're all supposed to be killed. Yes, it's sure hard on us.
Our film's big breakthrough came with the finding of this man, Wing Commander, later Air Commodore Curly Davis. As the officer in charge of all POWs at Bicycle Camp, he refused a Japanese order to choose the men who would appear in the propaganda film.
Japanese rice paper, eh? I couldn't ever learn to do their language because I was, again, too pig-headed.
The Japanese, obsessed with good order and discipline, had insisted that POWs run their own administration. Davis kept meticulous records of all activities, including reports written by POWs on the making of Calling Australia. Davis hid these records throughout the war. For 4 decades afterwards, he kept them nailed away in a crate at home. In 1982, at his daughter's request, he unsealed the crate. How does he now feel about having appeared in Calling Australia?
Well, as a young, enthusiastic officer with the old military rule of number, rank and name only, I naturally felt very resentful of the whole thing. And when you feel so deeply about your service and your duty to yourself, your men and your service, it is very difficult not to feel quite upset at having taken part in an event of that nature.
Hey there. What about a cup of tea? Thank you. Just got the news on the radio, too.
For the Japanese and the POWs, the key scene in which Davis appeared with other officers was a tea party filmed at a bungalow in Batavia. This scene was to bring out the major test of wills between prisoners and filmmakers.
I'd sure like to get back home. Try my luck at Flemington again.
Yes, well, you won't see me for dust till I'm stamping on the girlfriend's doorstep. Yeah, me too.
One of the officers chosen was the 22-year-old John Goodrick.
I believe that I was selected because I was in fairly good physical shape. I had the nickname Fat Boy at the time, so that's fairly indicative. There were not many officers in the camp at that time, and for some reason they wanted officers to make the film that they were proposing.
They asked for 5 officers from our camp. Finally, they nominated the officers and eventually produced a motor car, and we were bundled in. No option, in fact.
The Japs told us initially the aim of the film was to present to the people in Australia an indication of the conditions under which we were living. And it was their intention to make the film so that they could show to the people at home that they were treating us well, and that their intention was that they would sue for a separate peace with Australia, because it was their belief that Australia had been dragged into the war by America, and they really were not very keen to be there anyway. The atmosphere in the house for the first couple of days was very cordial. We were treated almost like human beings. The film crew were Americanized Japanese who all spoke good English, and they were obviously there to get something from us that they really shouldn't have expected. We were aware of that, of course. There were no guards present in the house, and the guards that were there were, I believe, told to keep out of sight. That continued for 2 or 3 days until they believed, and we had said that we could not cooperate because this was not our duty as officers. We were not allowed to make films that might help them in any way.
I received numerous threats from them, first of all for imprisonment for 12 months, solitary confinement actually, and to which I replied that I would accept it. Then finally they said, well, I would have to be shot anyway, and having accepted that, they told me it was a coward's way to die. Well, I couldn't agree with that either, being again, as I said earlier, rather defiant with regard to any pressure of this nature.
The basis of our disagreement was that they had provided scripts for us to read on camera that we did not agree with.
We saw what it was, what they intended, and what they wanted to film with all officers participating in saying a piece. It wasn't a very clever sort of script, excepting for one section which was anti-American. It said that we had heard an American propaganda broadcast stating we're all supposed to have been killed.
The deadlock was resolved by negotiation. They agreed that the script could be altered. Our senior Air Force officer said that as it was being done under duress, he felt that it would be all right and he'd give his authority for it to be done. We were given scripts with... the scripts that we were given had been altered, and we agreed to go along with it. The rest is in the film.
Pretty tough on it when we hear that the American propaganda broadcast say that we're all supposed to be killed.
Yes, it's sure hard on us. War surely makes live men dead, dead men alive.
After we gave back the clothes and belts and things that we'd borrowed to look our best, we were unceremoniously turned back into the camp again.
The camp to which most prisoners were returned was Bicycle Camp in a suburb of Batavia. A former Dutch barracks, it accommodated more than 5,000 men in better than average conditions. Before coming to Bicycle Camp, Don McNabb had survived the sinking of HMAS Perth and spent 2 nights in the sea. Making landfall, he was attacked by the Indonesians, handed across to the Japanese, and imprisoned for 6 horrific weeks in an overcrowded and lice-ridden native jail. For McNabb, Bicycle Camp was salvation.
There was a main gate and a row of officers and a guardhouse over here and a street right down the centre. And it was made up of huts on either side with pretty stable buildings and concrete for tiled floors set up off the ground. We were brought from Serang to Batavia into what looked like this lovely big camp, not knowing what it would finish up like, but to come from Serang jail into that, it was like, I don't know, I can't describe it. I know my feelings. I felt as though I'm saved. And there it was. That was it. It was the early days. To describe, to see all those people that saw us come into the place, no clothes or a bit of odd sarong or what we called a G-string. I know from what they told us afterwards. They wondered where we came from. We were all black. We were covered in oil fuel.
From September 1942, the Japanese commandant of the camp was Lieutenant Kenichi Sonai. He appears briefly as a paymaster in Calling Australia. After the war, Lieutenant Sonai paid for a series of war crimes. But in 1943, he gave vital information on Calling Australia to a prisoner working in the Japanese office.
I came into the office and in his usual way said to me, "Oi, Kei Sonai will tell you." And I didn't know what he was talking about, and he said, "Your mama and papa will know you, will see you." And I didn't know what he was talking about. And I can't remember what I asked him, but I must have said something, "Please explain," or "Tell me more." And he explained by saying, film, boom, boom, drop, Australia. And I still wasn't clear. And I said to him, pictures. He said, yes, Australia. And that's how I concluded that that film was being made by the Japanese as a propaganda film to come to Australia and show our people how well we were being treated, which was an absolute lie all the way through.
The kitchen hands are on the job. This well-equipped, efficient kitchen frees the boys from kitchen drudgery and gives them more time for other interests. And lucid instructions are given to ensure well-balanced meals, which will put anyone into a party mood.
The film had to soften up the Australian morale because the Japanese planned an invasion in 1943 in Australia. Our aim for the film was to fight a propaganda battle against the Allies of the treatment of prisoners of war, because the Japanese had information that their civilians were badly treated in the United States. And they tried to prove in the film that they were more civilized than the United States. The propaganda was coordinated in Tokyo by the Cabinet Information Bureau. In that organization, the army pressed the use of prisoners of war, but there was debate on how to use those prisoners of war, because it was against the Bushido, the traditional ethics of the Japanese army.
The use of prisoners for propaganda was a problem for the Japanese army. The traditional officers, steeped in the feudal code of Bushido, felt that all association with men who'd surrendered, men without honor, reflected badly on them. For the more practical, like the young Americanized filmmakers who made Calling Australia, this war had a new set of rules.
Saudara-saudara sekalian, cobalah saudara-saudara pasang radio.
Japanese imperial headquarters had used prisoners for radio propaganda almost from the start of the Pacific War. Ken Parkins was one of several Australians forced to broadcast from Radio Tokyo in Japan. Late in the war, while on a hunt for drawing paper, he made a discovery which confirms that the film Calling Australia was part of a much broader plan.
There was a basement down there and we'd never been able to get into it, and so we found that there's some windows at the back of it, and we were able to prise one and open it up and squeeze through it and drop down into the basement. They were more or less skylights, and Frank found himself quite a lot of paper there that he could use for his artwork, and I prized open a case and it was jammed full of little booklets called Calling Australia, and of course that to me was very important, and I grabbed one or two straight away, and we took those back. We looked around for further stuff, and we found thousands of Japanese flags, little Japanese flags. When we questioned them about these books, we were told that they were to be dropped all over Australia after they'd taken Darwin.
The film was not dropped as planned, because it was part of the invasion plans of the Japanese Navy. But when the film was completed in 1944, the Japanese were powerless against Allied naval operations. Already in 1943, the Japanese armies pointed to the fact that the war was lost. Now, in 1944, dropping this film over Australia would be a fruitless mission.
Calling Australia was one small part of a worldwide revolution in the use of film. With the outbreak of war, film language was stretched and twisted to support the war aims of every nation. Film propaganda taught people about their role in the conflict and persuaded them to fight. Films could not only instruct, they created emotions, formed opinions. The Japanese government wanted its film industry to push themes of national self-sacrifice. Newsreels and other short films were made to mobilize the home front and build hate for the enemy. In the Asian countries which Japan invaded, local filmmaking was a high priority.
Dari pabrik, dari kebun-kebunan, tempat marajua adalah medan peperangan.
This newsreel, Java News, was produced by Sendan Han, another propaganda section of the Japanese army. One of its aims was to promote Indonesia's co-prosperity with Japan.
The main change to Indonesians during the war was the regaining of our self-confidence. Due to the Japanese giving us the opportunity to train in military affairs and administration, and which both led to the ability for us to be independent. And for that, we thank the Japanese.
Throughout the war, the Netherlands Indies Film Unit made propaganda films in Melbourne. In 1944, this one presented the bleaker side of co-prosperity.
These liberated Indonesians, weakened by starvation, have to be carried on a stretcher. They are examples of the much vaunted Jap co-prosperity order. In Java, they were promised agricultural training by the Japs. Instead, the Japs sent them to Biak and forced them to work as coolies.
Such films usually stated that after the war, life in Indonesia would return to colonial business as usual. In this desire, Holland was not alone. Britain, America and France all wanted to repossess old Asian colonies.
Already their more fortunate brothers, with indomitable spirit, are back in military training to hasten the day of deliverance of Indonesia. The day when the Netherlands Indies are united once again with the liberated mother country.
The main aim of Japan's military propaganda was to destroy enemy morale. And in this aim, prisoners of war were a constant ingredient.
I was in a camp in River Valley in Singapore Island in the second half of 1942. And a Japanese officer came up to me with a list, and my name was on it, and he said, "Gunner Braddon, will you broadcast for the Imperial Japanese Army?" And I said, "No, thank you very much." And he hit me and said, "Will you broadcast for the Japanese Army?" And I said, "No, thank you very much." And he went away. That was it. The list, in fact, we found out later, contained mainly the names of AIF personnel who'd been at public schools like Shaw or Grammar or whatever, or at the university. I don't know how they got it. I suppose some idiot in our headquarters gave it to them. I wasn't a brave soldier. I surrendered 3 weeks before anyone else. But like any other soldier, if you were asked to do anything by the Japanese of that kind, you said no, or you gave them your name, rank, or number. But on the other hand, when they said to us at River Valley Camp, "Go down to the wharves today, 100 men, and load bombs," we loaded bombs. And those bombs were used against our people in New Guinea. It's a very funny ethical question. And we loaded the bombs because if we didn't, it wouldn't be just a bashing, it would be executions. So it was not entirely honorable, and if the other people did feel obliged to broadcast or obliged to make films, they weren't being entirely dishonorable.
Ironically, while we searched extensively through the armed services and archives for clues, in the very same collection which housed Calling Australia, we had a filmic answer to our filmic puzzle. For us, the rediscovery of Nippon Presents was like that of the original film.
So now we will see the Japanese film. And against its lies, the real thing, unfaked.
Japanese cameramen made this film, but this shot is intended to give the impression that our troops made it themselves. Men who would be more at home shooting with a Bren gun than with a camera.
Once our interest in Calling Australia was known, a mint-condition print of Nippon Presents was found here at the National Film and Sound Archive in a collection of films unseen since the 1940s. Produced by the Netherlands Indies Film Unit, Nippon Presents is full of the sharp memories and emotions of war.
During the whole of this fuss, our guards with fixed bayonets followed us just outside of camera range.
Indeed, it was made only months after the war, when a print of Calling Australia was found in Batavia. By intercutting Calling Australia with statements by ex-prisoners, the new film aimed to refute the claims of the original. These scenes from Calling Australia were filmed at a women's camp in East Java before living conditions declined.
Excuse me, I'm going
The Australian accent belonged to Daphne Hansen, the wife of the Calling Australia narrator. The rest of the women were Dutch internees.
It's certainly hard on me. What? Well, when I came into this camp, I did think I'd be able to lose weight. Instead of that, I keep putting it on daily. What are you talking about?
I will stop this worrying you about the figure again.
Now, Dorothy, go and show everybody a nice new dress. Look, Marie.
For the first few months, conditions were really not so bad in our camp. It was pleasantly placed, the food was good enough, we had reasonable freedom. We lived, in fact, in a fool's paradise. When the Japs had made the scenes you have just seen, that was the end. We were whisked off to the rat-infested, germ-laden, filthy slums you see, a mess of mud and misery, of brutal beatings and indignities, of weevily rice and rags and utter hopelessness. That is what Java meant to us from then on. Look at this little girl, where she gets the drinking water.
Appearing in both Calling Australia and Nippon Presents were Mrs. E.J. Johnson and Don McNabb.
They gave me pen and paper and told me to write a letter. I started to write, but not what I was thinking.
At war's end, Don McNabb was recognized as one of the people who had appeared in Calling Australia. He was recruited to appear in Nippon Presents, and he had another job, to persuade other ex-POWs to appear.
One stands out in my mind, Squadron Leader Shoppy. I'd met him in Victoria. He was loath to take part in the remake because, as he explained, that it was something that none of us were very proud of that we had done, although we knew why we'd done it, and we knew we were under duress because it was my own feelings. But finally he saw the light of what it would mean to have the remake, and he agreed to attend, and hence he did. Generally speaking, most of the people that I contacted, and there were 4 or 5 that held exactly the same views as myself in the beginning, and Squadron Leader Shoppy, we felt that we'd done something that could be against us, against our inner feelings. I had realised myself, once I'd seen this other picture, of what it could mean to remake it, and I managed to explain to most people in that vein. But there were 4 or 5 that took no part.
Conditions of living declined as time went on until it was quite plain that we were of no account to the Japs. International agreements and humanitarian principles meant nothing to them. Most of us, lucky enough to survive, have suffered in health due solely to the conditions under which we were forced to live. Had the Japanese taken the slightest interest in our welfare, many of our comrades would have been alive today.
If the Dutch-produced Nippon Presents wasn't as smoothly made as the Japanese original, its propaganda was just as potent.
I know that then these cunning devils, the Japanese, applied the only form of pressure which could ever make you yield. They informed you that unless you gave way and took part in the film, they would reduce the food ration to every man in camp.
A key figure in Nippon Presents was Brigadier Arthur Blackburn. He had led the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion through both the Syrian and Javanese campaigns.
I think we probably all felt a relief to know that a man so highly thought of and a Victoria Cross winner acted and spoke on our behalf.
I have investigated the whole matter fully, and I know, gentlemen, that you have nothing to be ashamed of, that you are prepared to resist even under the threat of death. I know that at one stage you, Wing Commander Davis, were threatened with death if you did not give permission to members of your camp to take part.
Yes, sir, that is quite correct.
I had no wish, quite frankly, to participate in such a production because my attitude from the time I arrived back from prison camp in Manchuria was that I wanted nothing further to do with the past, and I wanted to put it behind me. But having been approached again by the Brigadier and other people, I finally agreed to go along to find out what it was all about and if I felt I could take part in such a filming.
I discussed it with other officers and men. It was clear what the Japanese had in mind, but we felt that the reduction of food and refusal of medicines would cause the deaths of many of our comrades. So we had to go on.
It was a beautiful, bright morning that we had, the day of remembrance in honor of the Allied dead. The cenotaph, symbolizing the hallowed dead war heroes, who for the sake of their mother country have separated from their dearest ones to fight under severe conditions, thus sacrificing their lives and attaining the supreme glory. The bereaved families of these heroes have in every way our sincerest sympathies. The ceremony was carried out with all due solemnity and respect and was attended by Nippon and Allied high officials and soldiers.
At dawn one day, 500 of us were assembled in the hospital grounds, where a large cross had been placed, its base inscribed, "Lest we forget." When General Saito and his staff came on, a religious ceremony commenced. It was impressive.
The Nippon race, in the cause of justice, will stand firm and destroy all obstacles. But when resistance has failed, and to those that pledge in surrender, full protection will be given, these trays being the essence of our Bushido spirit. So this day, as we are gathered here, we pray for their souls that they may rest in peace and offer our truthful condolences.
We began to think the Nips must have a grain of decency in them after all. But when General Saito read his speech, the cameramen shooting, and then reread it to let them get close-ups, and we saw the shoddy cardboard cross swaying in the wind, and we realized the barbed wire around us had been camouflaged with broken branches, and the machine guns trained on us were hidden, then we tumbled to the farce it was, and an insult to our fallen comrades.
The Dutch director of Nippon Presents had been an internee under the Japanese in Java. With Nippon Presents, he implied just how lucky Australia was to have missed out on Japanese co-prosperity.
Private William Cook, one of 5 who survived the tortures of 150 AIF men in New Britain. Bayoneted 6 times in the back.
Nippon Presents was not alone in expressing hate for the Japanese.
Japan and the Japanese must pay for the shocking crimes against humanity. Every war criminal must be brought to trial and when found guilty, shot down like a dog.
But Hate the Jap films did not entirely represent returned Australian servicemen. Many who had spent the war dreaming of revenge simply wanted to forget the Japanese when the war was over. The Australian government, once again following the lead of the superpowers, Great Britain and particularly the United States, were now asked to help persuade our former enemies to become allies in a new war, the fight against communism. In the midst of all this change, Nippon Presents was suddenly as old hat as calling Australia. But to the Dutch Indies Film Unit, its anti-Japanese message might still serve a purpose: to combat rising nationalism in their old East Indies colony, now Indonesia. On the 17th of August 1945, 16 days before the Japanese surrender, Indonesians proclaimed their complete independence from the Dutch.
The Republic of Indonesia has been proclaimed.
Part of Australia's response was shown by this film, made by the Dutch director Joris Evans with the backing of Australian trade unions.
You fought for your freedom. Let the Indonesians have theirs.
For Australia's foreign policy, it was a new and independent era. Ben Chifley's Labour government preferred the transfer of power in Indonesia to be peaceful. As a result, it disliked Holland's warlike efforts to reimpose its rule. But more conservative elements in Australian politics equated Indonesian nationalism with communism.
And may Australia and Indonesia be united forever! Indonesia Merdeka! Indonesia Merdeka!
Melainkan kita harus mempergunakan seluruh tenaga kita bagi kepentingan tanah air.
Since the Japanese had helped promote Indonesian independence towards the end of the war, Dutch propaganda tagged the new republic a Japanese creation. But one of the most anti-Japanese of all films, Nippon Presents, was seen by only a handful of Australians. We know it was available for release, but we have no record of its screening to a general public. Any impact it might have had against the Japanese or Indonesia was negligible. And the ultimate irony of Calling Australia was revealed. After the Australian prisoners of war had been used twice for propaganda, their full story remained untold. Neither Calling Australia nor Nippon Presents were seen by the public for whom they were intended. Both films were consigned to the vault. Their story and that of the prisoners has now been told for the first time. Since they were made when films were shot on highly perishable stock, the original print of Calling Australia was to decay rapidly over the years. Had the film not been copied when it was found in 1969, it would no longer exist. Today, only a few bleached frames of the original print remain.
By gum, that was good. One of the nips asked me if I could eat a feed. I said I could eat 2 feeds, let alone 1. So he took me in and showed me a plate of steak and salads. He said, eat that as if you could enjoy it. Well, I didn't wait, but I tried to tell the camera with my eyes what was going on, and I hope you got me.
These officers and men have been troubled in their mind about having had to take part in the preparation of this Japanese film. I tell them they need not be so troubled. They put up an epic of heroic resistance. They gave way only to save the lives of their comrades, determined to make as many difficulties as possible and to turn the whole thing into a farce if they could.